everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy, I'm the host of the show, and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California, on strike, walking the picket line, pushing Mabel in her new stroller, carrying a sign that, look, I gotta say, we went to picketed Netflix today. We've been all around. CBS, Radford, Disney, Netflix today. My sign, I come up with this line. David Zaslav is the CEO of HBO Max. He's the guy that canceled all those movies that are already done and shelved a bunch of shows that were on HBO Max to save taxes last year, and has kind of become the evil face of the studio heads. So this is what the sign was supposed to say. This is what the line was. David Zaslav could never do my job, parentheses, writing. But I could easily do his job, parentheses, screaming at his assistants. It's not a bad line. It doesn't fit on the sign, though. I had to shorten it. It wasn't great. Some people liked it. Look, this is all, when you're walking in the hot sun for hours, all you have is, did I write a good slogan for my sign? Didn't do it today. But folks, do you know what did do it today? This episode. I don't know what that means, but this is wonderful. This episode is Joey Alison Sayers, and if you don't know who Joey is, I'm going to read you her bio right now. Originally from Colorado Springs, Colorado, cartoonist Joey Alison Sayers has drawn comics for most of her life, but only really started publishing them as mini-comics in her mid-20s. This led to many other opportunities, such as her strip, The Machine That Travels Through Time, which ran in Mad Magazine for almost a decade, and Thing Part, which was syndicated in a number of newspapers in the late aughts. Currently, Joey writes the syndicated comic Alley Oop, and her own comics run on the wonderful left-wing political comic site, The Nib. I subscribe to it, I highly recommend it. Not just for Joey's comics, although there's some of my favorites, but I would say, just in general, it's a great comic site to support. So yeah, we get into her growing up in Colorado Springs, which is a apparently very conservative Christian town. I think a previous guest was from Colorado Springs, because it's ringing a bell. I think I say that in this episode. And I remember all the awful conservative stuff that they said was from there. Is it Laura Veers? I don't know. Anyway, we talk about Colorado Springs. We talk about depression, about writing for Mad Magazine, and a lot of other stuff. I hope you enjoy this. And if you do, what I like to do here in the beginning is a little recommended. If you this is your first time listening to the show and you're like, hey, this was a good interview, I want to hear some other ones. Well, why not check out other episodes I've done with comics people? Either, why not people who have published in the Nib, say Ben Passmore, Keith Knight. Those were good interviews. Or what about just indie comics folks in general? Kevin Huizinga, Farrell Dalrymple, I talked to them recently. Or people who have written for Marvel and DC and all that. Jeff Lemire, Kieran Gillen, Mike Allred, Ram V. Those have been some recent episodes. If you like what you hear, you're like, I should subscribe to this. Why not? Why not slam that subscribe button on whatever your podcast app is? You can also find me on social media at Andy Beckerman. If you want pictures of the strike, why, that's Instagram for you. If you want dumb jokes, and also I guess I've been writing threads about class warfare lately. That's Twitter for you. Coming up next week, great interview with Isabel Olive, who you might know as the indie rock musician Half Gringa. Also, Jay Holtham, a comic book writer, currently writing the Bishop series for Marvel, and also a TV writer. That's coming up, so stay tuned for that. But for now, let's talk to Joey. Before we started recording, and I asked you how you were, and then you asked me how I was, and I paused for a moment to try to give you an honest answer, and you were like,
yeah.
I don't need an honest answer.
Yeah.
You're like, I guess lie to me. You didn't exactly say lie to me, but I'm curious. Are you someone who would rather engage with someone where they are emotionally, or do you just want to have a pleasant conversation with someone and then just move through that, like swim through it like it's nice, pleasant waters? Or do you want to get into it when you're talking?
No.
Even though we're strangers. We are strangers to each other. I enjoy your work immensely. Though, can I just say this? Nothing brings me more glee, and that's not hyperbole when I say this, than your drawings of transphobes and when they are like, like when they're slavering, is that even a word? When they're just like, so like, just like maniacally gleeful over their like insane bullshit. Your drawings of that make me laugh so much.
Oh, thanks.
So
it's very cathartic to draw those.
Yes, I can imagine. So okay. This is all just a preface for me saying we are strangers, roughly, besides the fact that I like your work a lot. Okay. Would you rather get into it with someone who you don't really know, or do you want to just have like a nice conversation and then move on to the next thing?
No, I think by and large, I'd rather get into it honestly with somebody. I like talking to people and I like meeting people. And, if I don't want everyone to just give me the same, sugar-coated answer. Like, I'm great. I'd rather hear like, no, I'm terrible. Like, not that I want everyone to be terrible.
Sure.
But you know what I mean? It's much more interesting to have conversations with people who let you in a little bit. And I'm a perpetual oversharer. So I'm not going to hold back. So I wouldn't expect anyone else to either. Because
this is the thing. And I don't know how you feel, but personally, I am okay in my day to day in America right now, as I am watching it crumble around me, like piece by piece. Like I am, I am watching from afar as like a B-2 bomber drops bombs on like Dresden or something, and I'm like, interesting. Okay.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it's funny because like, ever since COVID, I don't think most people that I interact with, nobody says I'm fine anymore. If you ask how they're doing, if they want to give like that pat answer, it's, well, I mean, all things considered, I'm fine. And I think that's just sort of how the world is right now. I mean, there's no way to say everything, like, oh, it's great. I'm having a great day. I'm having a great day while I'm watching the rights and safety of like so many groups of people in this country be taken away.
Yeah. I tweeted like an hour ago. I was like, oh, this is how Nazi Germany started. Okay. I get it. All right.
Yeah. I remember when we used to talk about things or, policies or people as being fascist, and it was just a bit of like hyperbole. And now it's like, no, now it's like really actually happening. It's terrible.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the thing I've been trying to articulate. What is this feeling? Because again, I am okay here in Los Angeles, but I'm not okay. Like it's a Schrodinger's emotional state, a Schrodingerian. I don't think that's
I think that's the adjective. Yeah. But it's the same. I'm up here in the Bay Area. I'm in Oakland, and if I never leave the Bay Area, or if I, just take a plane to LA or a few other, nearby spots, it's no big deal. But yeah, I feel it's weird. It's weird feeling like there are large portions of this country I don't want to go to anymore. I don't feel safe in. Not that I felt terribly safe in many of them to begin with, but now it's explicit, Yeah. And I still, carry a lot of privilege. It's just wild.
Yeah. I was going to say, I'm Jewish and my wife is black. And so we're like, well, we're not going to go like south of the Mason-Dixon anyway.
Right.
So,
yeah.
I'm like,
that's a good point.
Sure, there's places that I wasn't going to go in 1997 that I'm still not going to go in now it's like patently unsafe.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And it just is changing by the day. I mean, my wife and I were talking about taking our kids to like see some national parks in the Southwest next year. And I'm like, well, let's see, which states would we drive through, and like where would be safe? Is Grand Canyon still going to be like okay? Like, or is it going to be are they going to be throwing people like us into the abyss? Like, So it's. I mean, again, it's a place of privilege because there are, I don't know. people have had to deal with this forever, right?
Yeah.
And like we have too. I mean, to a certain degree. I mean, we're a queer couple, and I'm trans, and that's, you know, sometimes more or less taken note of. But you know, so we've always had to think about it. But now when there's like threats of legal action, or like, you know, I don't want to have to go to jail just because I have to take a piss.
Right. I guess that's what I was thinking of when I'm like, this feels homey to me in some way. I don't know.
Yeah.
I grew up in a very Christian area, so there's always this kind of feeling of like, oh, I'm not part of that group.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's something where I like, at least, I'm not saying this is a silver lining. I'm just saying that like, I'm like, okay, well, I don't feel any different from when I was a child, right? I still feel, I mean, you know, the threats are more like someone's going to shoot at my synagogue now.
Right.
Other than they were like a little bit abstract when I was growing up. But there is, at least if I'm just like, I was right. Yeah. My parents were right to raise me the way they were. And I don't know if if there's any kind of like homey feeling about it. I don't mean this to be like a good thing at all. Like I want to keep hitting that point. Like it's not like I'm not saying like thumbs up to this, but I'm like, at least I don't know. You tell me. No,
I guess you're just saying it feels like you expected this all along to some degree. I guess I didn't, you know, but then I also grew up in a really conservative Christian community, in Colorado. And, it was super oppressive. I mean, at the time I was an observing Christian, I guess you could say. I mean, I was, but I was also a child. So I don't know that is really, if I didn't really have the consent, to like do that. It was just kind of like foisted upon me. I mean, I love and still respect my parents, but that's like, you know, it's not like they handed me a menu with all the philosophies and faiths of the world and said like, you know, let's talk about this. And, you know, for the most part, it wasn't so bad, but it was just the community itself was just terrifying. It was just like a horrible place to grow up in. It was very oppressive and very controlling. And, I hated that. So once I left the town I grew up in, I also left the church and then all that behind, and I don't miss it. But, so I don't know. I guess I kind of got used to the idea of things getting better and freer and more accepted, which I still think to an extent they are, but like,
sure.
But yeah, so this feels like steps back. I feel like the world is heading towards where like the kind of place that I grew up in, and I don't like it one bit. But, you know, but I'm raising kids in this world, and so I'm forced to try to look for the good things and try and focus on the good things while also, you know, telling them about the bad things and telling them that there are horrible people out there doing horrible things, but that, you know, we are a loving family and we know lots of other loving families and loving people, and that's important too. So
when you were younger, you said you were terrified? I guess, okay, first question is, at what point did the Christianity you were growing up in turn from something that you enjoyed or that meant something to you, if it did at all, into something that was oppressive and terrifying? I
mean, I would say it was kind of once I started becoming more of a person, like as I entered adolescence, and started to like kind of realize who I was mentally and physically and just as a human being in the world. I could see that it wasn't really going to work out between me and that religion, between Christianity. And it just felt like, well, the other thing too is that was also around the time that I started becoming like hugely depressed. And the message that I would get from the church all the time was like, you know, God can fix everything or whatever. Like, you know, it's basically like, whatever, like you have problems, but it's all for a reason. And I don't want to make light of anybody's faith. Like you know, whatever works for people is fine, as long as it's not, you know, hurting other people or taking the rights away from other people. Like I know lots of people who are religious and I would never look down upon them for that. But for me, I was receiving messages that basically I was I was depressed, I was queer, although not out at the time. And those things were problems, but that they would just go away, that I just had to like believe harder. And that, that just feels it felt to me very dismissive and very like, oh, this is kind of your deal. You got to deal with it. Nobody was out there trying to help me get through any of it. So finally I was just like, F this. So I don't know if I can swear, by the way.
Sure. Feel free.
Okay. I'll stop holding back.
You're like, this is a load of S.
Yeah.
But like, because that sounds like Scientology almost, like depression doesn't exist, just pray it away. Was it a specific denomination, or was it just like evangelical in general?
It wasn't even evangelical. I mean, I grew up in an Episcopalian church, but I also spent time in like Baptist communities because I had friends who were Baptists, and that was a lot more oppressive, but just kind of just the philosophy overall. And I don't know, maybe I just didn't have good people in my life, helping me through it or to somehow square the beliefs of this church with like my own mental health. But it just wasn't for me.
Yeah. I think we're also maybe, I don't know how old you are, but I know that back in the 90s, mental health really wasn't like, that was the beginning of people starting to recognize. I remember Prozac Nation when that came out, and I was like, because I was a teenager then, and I was like, oh, okay. But like, it still wasn't something that, I mean, I grew up in Pennsylvania, and I've said this before, but like, you only went to therapy if you were like ordered to by the court or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's how it was. I mean, for when I was in I would say my early 30s, I sort of started becoming bitter towards my parents and being like, why didn't you send me to therapy? Like, it was so obvious I was depressed and having suicidal ideation and engaging in self-harm and all these, horrible things. And I was just really mad at them. And then, I realized like, why would they? That wasn't the culture. That wasn't like what people did. Like, I didn't know anybody at that age who was going to therapy. I didn't even know what therapy was, but I was holding them to like a more, a more contemporary standard of like, why would you, like I would do that for my kids. But that just wasn't a tool that they knew that they had. So I don't know. I'm not mad at them anymore.
Now, is that okay? That process, because I think less to be mad at my parents, and I'm still working it out in therapy. So I'm wondering how that process went for you.
Well, I mean, it's not that I haven't had, struggles with my parents, obviously. I think we all have. And I've, had stretches where I've talked to them less or whatever. But, ultimately, when I came out as trans and, when my life changed in ways that a lot of families would disown their children over, my parents hunkered down and, held me tighter and were like, let's figure this out and like, tell us how we can support you. So I will always be, eternally grateful to them because it's an amazing stance and not one that I really thought that they were going to take. And the fact that they did it just meant a lot to me. So
yeah, that's it. I mean,
it's astonishing. I mean, because they still live in Colorado and they're still, in a pretty conservative community, although they're not, I wouldn't call them conservative themselves. But so it really came off as a shock. And I did a comic about this years ago, but they were in my coming out, I talked about how I self-medicated a lot with drugs, especially in like my late teens and 20s. And that was what they latched onto when I came out and told them I was trans and going through all this stuff. And they're like, wait a minute, you did drugs? And I was like, well, yes, but let's like stick to the important thing. But to them that was, because they were concerned about how that affected me and probably what led me to that path. And I didn't get into, the heaviest stuff, but I was behaving in an unsafe manner. So yeah.
When you say conservative, like, do you mean, okay, I try to like, I think they're like there's friends of my parents that are conservative, but they seem like decent people.
Yeah.
But then there's like, now it's just become fascism.
Right.
I'm curious, like, what was the like flavor of conservatism in the town?
Well, I mean, of the town like I grew up in?
Yeah.
Well, Colorado Springs. Well, I mean, I think it's hard to disentangle a little bit because like, in the 80s, which is, kind of like when I mostly grew up, there was still crazy shit going on. And there was like horrible things that the Republicans were doing to like destroy our nation and other nations. And but I feel like at the time, like conservatives weren't like they are now, like you say, like it's almost just pure fascism now. And so it's hard to like be like, well, I think we can see eye to eye, you want to kill me and my family and I want everyone to have healthcare, isn't really something that you can reconcile. But it was, Colorado Springs at the time was, the home, there were like 5 military bases centered there in that city. There were like over 100 conservative Christian organizations that were centered there, like Focus on the Family. Like, I don't know if you remember them. And like,
yes, I do.
All these other like really virulent, like, anti everything, kind of Christian organizations that were just, just scary to be around. So, so it just gets in the water there, like it's that led me to just feeling like, oh my God, like if anyone found out that I was like not just a normal person, whatever that means, but that I wasn't like, that didn't fit into their little box, that they would surely just, kill me. I mean, that's how I felt. I felt like I was like, I was afraid for my life, even not like anyone was like threatening my life, but like internally I felt like those are the stakes,
Sure. You're not irrational for feeling that either. Right.
Right. Yeah. And especially as a kid, like as an adolescent, you don't know, like you don't know what's possible in the adult world. And, so yeah, that totally felt real to me.
Yeah. So I mean, one of the things, I'm not just like trying to poke your trauma to like, like just
too late.
Because I mean, the thrust of the show is I want to know how your creative side developed. And then, and really, my whole theory is that that's all part and parcel of everything. And that it all influences your existential journey and your creative journey are intertwined like DNA strands. And that's kind of why I'm at, because I'm like, especially if you are capital O other in any way growing up in any of these kind of communities, especially, I mean, this is like, I think I had a guest from Colorado Springs on once, because this is just all like ringing a bell in terms of just how, because it's not just conservative in terms of like, again, my parents' friends are like fiscally conservative, but they're not like hateful morons. But it's like, especially with Focus on the like any of these other groups that are just like, I mean, it is absolute, just like the airwaves are filled with hatred. I'm sure you can feel it in your body just walking around.
Yeah. And like, I mean, I grew up with people who didn't believe that dinosaurs existed, that the dinosaur fossils were placed in the earth by Satan to tempt our fate, our faith. And like if you can't understand, dinosaurs or basic science, like, like how can you be expected to understand like complex human beings and ways of living? So, I mean,
right.
But to your point about, like creativity, I mean, I do think like trauma is a seed, for some of us that leads to creativity or humor. I mean, I think that's where, I think that really fed into my, seeking humor as a way to deal with it all. I mean, it's, it almost feels cliche, but it's just true. Like, if it was all the pain that was given to me, that I internalized, that I lived through, that made me think like, well, I can make jokes. I can make jokes about it, and I feel a little bit better, and I can make people laugh, and then I get some positivity back from a world that feels hostile. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not like, I'm so glad I had all that childhood trauma, but I'm glad that I took it and turned it into something that makes me feel good and makes other people feel good. Hopefully.
Yeah. At what point did this start to develop?
The humor part or the creativity part? I mean, I guess it was always there. I mean, I always had seeds of it. I wouldn't say like if I hadn't lived a challenging childhood that I would have just grown up, a boring like cog, because I think I was always making jokes, and I was always being silly, and I was always kind of a ham. And I was always like, I was always like drawing and making comics, and I was always reading comics. And so it was just kind of a natural extension because, Garfield made me laugh. So maybe I could make other people laugh because, he was just some cat, two-dimensional cat. And
was that the seed, Garfield?
I mean, it was definitely one of them for sure. I mean, the great thing about Garfield is that it's simple enough, and the humor is simple enough that like I, as like a 5-year-old, got it. I got it enough. I'm sure there are some adult jokes I missed. Not really, probably. I'm sure it's all very superficial, but I can't say that I've read a lot of Garfield in current times. But yeah, I mean, but it is good like that. It's like, I mean, obviously it's not exclusively a kid's comic. But my kids read it and think it's freaking hilarious. So, it's good at that. It's good at what it does. I mean, I'm not a Garfield hater. I mean, it has its problems. I don't want to get too deep into it, but there certainly are some problematic parts to it. But yeah, no, that was like
the way he treats Nermal.
Exactly. I know. I mean, well, I'm not really going to get into it. This is what I wrote my graduate thesis on. Just kidding. The problematic. I don't know. I can't finish that. I'm not even smart enough to come up with a fake thesis title.
Garfield's imperialist tendencies.
There you go. And then you need some sort of subheading. Yeah,
he's always trying to mail Nermal to Abu Dhabi, and so trying to
that's messed up. Yeah.
Export American capitalism to the Middle East.
Wow. You just that's a class, university level class you just started right there.
But I feel a lot of resonance with that because it was Garfield. I would voraciously read those books, and also Peanuts, like the old ones, because I was always, as a child, I didn't really get it that like people's drawing style can change. And so it was always like, if you saw the early ones, especially also early Garfield, they were drawn much differently than like the Peanuts, the cartoons that were in the newspaper when I was a kid in the 80s. And so like that stuff kind of blew my mind a little bit too.
Yeah. And I mean, that's what I love about comics too, is it's like, it's totally accessible. Like the drawing style and the writing, it all feels like something that anyone could really do, especially as like so I started drawing comics like really early on. And it was kind of the medium that spoke to me.
As conservative as Colorado Springs was or is, did pop culture penetrate that? I'm imagining as like a shield.
No, it wasn't that bad. I mean, it wasn't like that. It wasn't. Yeah, we didn't grow up in like horse and buggies and things like that. But no. So there's plenty of pop culture. It was, I think, probably just as much as anywhere else. I went to the mall. And, I went to Sam Goody and went to Walden Books and all that stuff. And so, I mean, it was all that stuff was there, and watch movies. I mean, I wasn't allowed to watch R-rated movies until I was much older than my peers. But that was just the way But yeah, it was all there.
Is it still, when your depression kicks in, when you said when you were an adolescent, right?
Yeah.
Is it all encompassing? Or is it, like in waves, or how is it affecting your life at that time?
It was pretty bad. I mean, it was pretty all encompassing. It informed every aspect of my life. It was terrible. I mean, I wouldn't wish it on anybody. And I didn't have any of the tools to it. I wasn't taking any medicine. I wasn't seeing any therapists. I was just like pushing through it. And this went well into my 20s. And when I thought like, the best way to deal with depression was just to get drunk every night, which really, it doesn't work. Just that's my PSA. You cannot drink your way out of depression. It might feel like it at the time, but it doesn't work.
Did you start going to therapy? Like what pulled you out of the, I couldn't say nosedive, but that's just.
No, I mean, it was kind of that. I mean, yeah, I tried to go to therapy. I tried a couple times. I don't know. I had some bad experiences with therapy, and, I'm glad I pushed through. I mean, I remember there was one time I went and my first sort of experience with the therapy, I guess, was in high school, talking to a school counselor and saying like I was having some dark thoughts and thinking about not being alive anymore. And I thought we had a confidential space. I didn't understand all this because I'm like 17 or whatever. And then she told like the teacher that I was and like it started, she started telling, like I got called out of class and I was just like, I've been betrayed. I'm never talking to anyone again. And fortunately I tried again. And then I saw this therapist who was also terrible. And, it wasn't until years later, right around the time that I transitioned that I was like, went and saw somebody. I was like, hey, my life's a fucking mess. And she was great. And she was like, you might want to consider like an antidepressant. It really helps people. And that really, that helped me turn the corner. And that was also around the time, a little bit before, my wife and I had our first kid, was when I was like, I got to get on some sort of antidepressant, because I was still trying to power through it for a long time and thinking like, you know, because I thought, okay, like a big seed of my depression is this gender stuff. And I was like, okay, I'm trans. I got to figure out like what to do. I got to decide like, is transition right for me? And, or how am I going to live my life? And at the time, I mean, this was, 15 years ago, 16 years ago, which doesn't sound like that long ago, but in the world of like trans stuff is, basically 200 years of like, because like there weren't a lot of resources out there. It wasn't like I like met people that were trans. I think I remember like before I transitioned or doing anything, like I met a trans woman at a bookshop, who worked there. I was doing like a comics reading there and I was like, holy shit, this person is amazing. And they're trans and they're beautiful and they're full of life and they're funny. And like, I was just like, now trans people are everywhere, online, out in the world, on TV, in movies, and like positive depictions in fiction. Whereas like, when I grew up, it was all just played for laughs, yeah. Or pity. Because I like you'd see on like the daytime talk shows, like they'd have like trans people on there and just be like, oh, look at this horrible sad sack, like, and there's it was crazy to see that and just be like, oh fuck, that's me. Like, I don't know, I guess I'm just a horrible sad sack. So that was when I started seeing other people. So I was like, seeing other people out there that were trans. So, and I was going to therapy and I was like, okay, well, once I like unravel all this trans stuff, then everything will be great. And it was much better. Like, I won't deny that. Like, my life improved immensely, when I started transition, like almost immediately, because I felt like I was finally, making real something that I knew to be true from my earliest memories, so I was like 4 years old. Like, this is not something that like I came into lightly or that that was a big mystery to me. But it just wasn't possible back then. So my depression got better, but not great. But then it was right around the time. So it was like 2012 that, my daughter was born, and it was leading up to that when I was just like, I need to do something. Like, I can't be a mom and be like super depressed, all the time or part of the time or whatever. So that's when I decided like I needed to really get a handle on that. So that's when I, started taking antidepressants, and that's been just amazing for me.
Okay. That's 3 big changes right in the same temporal area. I'm kind of curious, how did your creative way of working, or how you make things, or what you wanted to talk about? I'm curious if that changed in this time, or if there were different. Can you chart any kind of differences because I think you said it was you transitioned, then your daughter was born, and then you got on antidepressants. Yeah, and first you went into therapy, that right?
Order. Yeah.
So that's a lot in a short order, right?
Yeah. Well, things definitely got hairy around then. I mean, around the time that my daughter was born, I basically stepped back from doing any comics work or any sort of writing or anything, just because, I mean, obviously it's a pretty intense time of life. Not a lot of time, not a lot of brain power. I still don't have my full brain capacities from having 2 kids. There's always I'm always going to be running at like 80%.
I get you.
Fine.
We have 2 cats and a dog. I understand.
Same exact thing.
Exactly what you're feeling.
I know. Yeah, I know. I can only imagine what it's like trying to teach a cat to read and use the toilet. Yeah, but no, I really pulled back from all that, and it was, it was after a couple years, once my daughter was a couple years old, then I started to figure out how to get back into being creative again. But I think between all of those life changes, I would say like the big change in my creativity is I think it's just nicer. I'd like to think that my sense of humor and the things that I find, the stories that I want to tell, and the jokes that I want to make aren't mean spirited. Not that I was ever like that bad, but like I learned how to make jokes that weren't necessarily at the expense of somebody who doesn't deserve it. Like I still will, rake someone over the coals if they're just an asshole for being an asshole. Like you're saying, transphobes or people that are just like just people that are mean. Like I won't hold back in that, but I will think about how I treat even them. Because we all have blind spots, right? And we all have to kind of keep an eye out if we want to be caring, thoughtful people in our lives. I think we have to always be on the lookout for who we might be hurting in the things that we say or do, or the jokes that we make, or the things that we're writing. I don't know. Like, I guess the example I can think of is I made a comic, this is a few years back, where I referred to somebody who I was trying to portray as kind of like trying to portray someone as kind of a loser. And I referred to them as being a virgin, which, I wasn't like trying to make fun of virginity per se. But somebody called me out on it. Somebody online was like, "Hey, that's not cool. Like some people just, haven't had sex, and like, that's either their choice or it's not their choice, but it's not really like, it's not super cool to like make fun of people for that." And I was like, fuck, you're right. Like that was uncool, and there are comics in my past that I maybe don't feel great about. Like, not that they're like, some secret trove of like racist comics that I made or whatever, but maybe some that were less sensitive, or maybe some that kind of made fun of of people for, being overweight or whatever, like things that just weren't that great and
right.
weren't that cool. And so, but I think that's kind of like the fun and the challenge of writing humor is, like my goal would be to make everybody laugh. Right. So I don't want anyone feeling shitty from a joke that I make. That's horrible. Yeah. And if you go back and you watch movies, so we've been watching a lot of old animated movies with my kids, and just like Shrek and things like, just like some of the older stuff. Cause like,
that's called old. It makes me,
yeah. But I think that was like probably about 2007 or something like that, or 2002. I don't know. It was like,
older ones like 2000s. Cars, The Incredibles.
Yeah.
Like,
it is old though. That's old stuff.
I thought you were going to say like Song of the South or like.
Oh God, no. I could never go back that far.
From 1952.
That's the thing. You can't go back that far. Like, I don't know. Like media gets really problematic really fast when you start going backwards. And, yeah. So like,
the Secret of NIMH still hold up?
God, I don't know. I'd be curious. I doubt it. I severely doubt it, because almost nothing holds up, I'll read books with my kids and like, God, what was I reading? There's a book called like Half Magic, and it's from, I think, the 80s. It's kind of it's a funny premise and it's a humorous book. And, but like, there's this whole chapter that's so racist. And I was just like, we're skipping this chapter, and leaving like Roald Dahl, some of it, like his stuff. Like,
yeah.
Like, you're doing like this on the fly editing when you're reading with kids these days. If you want to not like give them the same seeds of monstrosity that we all had to like break out of. But yeah, I'm like, well, maybe I won't read this description of the Oompa Loompas because this is horrible. Like, oh, I don't feel comfortable reading this out loud. Things like that. Yeah, but also all in the early 2000s, like there was just so much meanness in those kinds of and just in so much media. God, I was reading this book with my daughter. I won't say what it was because I don't want to, offend the author on the highly likely chance that they listen to this. Just kidding. But yeah, it was just like every piece of dialogue was one person being like, yeah, well, you suck. Well, yeah, well, you suck and you're horrible. And it was like all played up for laughs. And I was like, this is so mean. Like, I can't read this to you anymore.
Okay. I mean, I have a lot of empathy, but I have trouble, especially for, say, my class enemies. I have trouble accessing for people who are just like hateful or downright like actually evil in the world. It's very difficult. The minute you said, calling like someone a virgin or something, I was like, oh yeah, I get it. Like I understand. I felt it in my chest, but I'm like, oh right. It seems difficult to me to access it for a lot of people. I'm curious how you are able to teach me, please. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's a fine line for sure. But I feel like often sort of portraying these people, like hateful people, just portraying them as they are, or as just like a slightly exaggerated version of themselves. And they just kind of embarrass themselves. I don't really feel like you need to get into like name calling too much or painting them as this other type of person, or like, oh, you're, whatever. I can't even think of anything, but like, but that's not really necessary, because then you're drawing other people into it. Like, what are we going to say? Like, fuck, Ben Shapiro's an asshole because he's an asshole, not because he's like, this kind of person, or because he, is like this kind of person. Like, it's like when people are making fun of Donald Trump because he is incontinent, which is, I think pretty much a fact. But like, that's not, why are you making fun of him because he's incontinent? Make fun of him because he's a fucking idiot and he's an asshole. Like, like these are the things. It's easy to make fun of that. You don't have to like make fun of him for something that is medical, even though like it's objectively like kind of like there is a little bit of humor to it, but like, I don't know, you don't need to dwell on it. There's plenty of wonderful people in the world that are incontinent, and you would hate to lump them in with like one of the worst human beings on the planet.
Yeah. Were you this empathetic when you were younger, or is this just something you've gained in adulthood?
I mean, I think no. I mean, I think it's something that's grown over time. And I think something that I accessed a lot more after a transition. For me, I just I have much more access to my emotions and to empathy and caring. And that's just and that could just also be a part of just growing up and getting older. And, I mean, I've always had parts of it. Sure. I used to, when I was a kid, I used to have this internal monologue that just was very frequent to me. And I would just quietly in my own head wax poetic about just how creative and empathetic I was. Cause I could really imagine what it would be like to be a girl. I was like, wow, I must be so like, I must just have amazing powers of empathy that I could really just like put myself in this situation and imagine what it'd be like, not really like realizing that perhaps, but there were maybe other things going on that were informing that particular,
were your parents empathetic people?
I don't know. I wouldn't say that necessarily. I mean, they're kind people. But
like, I'm not asking you this to like give me the dirt on your parents. It's not that. I'm just curious about kind of just like how did you understand morality when you were younger? How did they transmit this stuff to you? How did you understand empathy? All that kind of stuff. Like, what was their stance on it? Just because I'm curious, like, how did they teach it to you, or how did you see them display it, and then kind of just like you kind of like see them and then you're like, and then you just kind of naturally act like them or push against them or whatever.
I'm not sure I got it from them. I'm not saying that they aren't. I mean, they're kind people. They definitely are. They're kind people. They're great people. and I think, I think I gotta say, like, a lot of like my core moral beliefs kind of did come from the church. And I hesitate to say that because I don't want to give the Christian church any more publicity than it already has. I mean, again, to each their own. I don't care. But there are some good messages in that religion, and that's why I never paint with a broad brush. And I live in in a very liberal community. I work at the library, so like that's also very liberal. We're very just a bunch of socialists. And I hear people say really derogatory things about Christianity or Christians, and like I get what they're trying to say, but there are lots of really nice Christians out there. I mean, it's at its core, at its true beliefs, it's a religion of kindness. It's just unfortunate most people don't practice it that way. That do practice it. It's a shame. But honestly, I mean,
there are nuns that get arrested protesting nuclear sites.
Totally.
Like that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And there are lots of like Christians that spend like all of their free time handing out meals to people that are hungry. That's fantastic. I wish I were that virtuous. I don't, I'm not, like I do my best, but like, so there's a lot of good stuff in there. I mean, there's like, like a lot of the core beliefs are kind of like, just don't be a dick and help people out when you can. And maybe don't like hoard all the money you can and, just be chill and, don't, sleep with your neighbor's spouse, like, there's some good stuff in there. Like, so I think that's where a lot of kind of my own personal core, moral beliefs kind of came from. Not that I couldn't have found some of that out on my own, but I think that, it's good to hear people repeat that. Now it's, it's not to say that I'm taking my own kids to church or anything like that, or that I am teaching them anything about Christianity. And I find it a little bit, concerning when other people in, like my kids community or whatever, start talking about religion too much. I'm like, maybe just put the brakes on that. Because I feel like ultimately it's my choice what my kids learn about that kind of stuff. And I think I can teach them those core moral beliefs in a secular way. And I'd prefer them to get them that way. Yeah. I don't think that those kinds of beliefs are inextricably linked to religion. Like, I think you can decide like, hey, it's not cool to murder people without it having come from like a stone tablet in a story.
Yeah. No, that's totally right. I do credit, even though I'm not super observant, I do credit Judaism with instilling a moral backbone in me that, and I can like, I used to be a philosophy professor. So like I can, throw all the Kant and, whatever, Nietzsche. I don't know. That's not the right person to afford this, but like I can throw all the Kant at you that I want to try to justify it. But it really is just there is no rationality to it. It's just like, oh, this seems to be a better way of living my life. And it just so happened that Judaism installed it into my brain. That was me, by the way, pantomiming a 3.5-inch disc into an old school computer. That's what I was miming.
Yeah, how we all get our information in our brains. Well, I mean, probably. I mean, not to get too philosophical, but it's probably these sort of core beliefs, these sort of core moral beliefs that led to the founding of some of these religions, or maybe not the founding, but some of their beliefs. I mean, they're all kind of similar in a lot of ways. In at least their core teachings, if not their actual practice. Yeah. So that's why I don't think, I mean, there are people out there that will argue like you can't have morality without religion. And I think that's bullshit. I think you can't have religion without the morality that comes first. I don't know. Yeah. It's not like I left the church and started, stealing stuff all the time. Cause it's like, I'm not beholden to those rules anymore. I mean, I did go through a very short shoplifting phase, but we don't have to get into that.
How old were you?
Oh, God, 19.
Oh, okay.
Old enough to know better.
Okay.
But
not 12.
But I was also poor enough to justify it in my own head.
Yeah. What economic class did you grow up in?
Oh, wow. I would say like, pretty middle class. I don't know. Is that a correct answer?
There's no
I don't know. Are there different ways to talk about it? Is there like, I don't know.
There's no I was not asking what your parents' income was necessarily. Oh, yeah. I was just like,
let me check Zillow and see how much they paid for their house back in 1981.
Oh, you will be depressed.
No, I know. It's terrible.
Yeah. No, I asked because I think these are the things that set you up in a certain way. They are going to set you up to interface with the world, right? Mm-hmm. And I obviously in this country we don't talk about economic class enough.
No,
and it's another one of these things. There's so much stuff in our country that's just repressed and just pushed down, and and then someone in charge is like, we'll deal with it later. Biden's like, we'll kick the can down the road, and it's just like, ugh. But do you know if that has influenced your career choices or your, because cartooning, even though, you said you work at the library, but even working at the library, I would say is in 2023, not a safe choice. I mean, maybe in Oakland, maybe in California, it's a little bit nicer.
Yeah. You mean safe in that, like, there are places that are getting rid of libraries or defunding libraries?
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, that's not, I don't think a concern out here in the Bay Area. Libraries are still very strong community centers that are supported by the local governments because we have, relatively smart people in positions of power here that are not just ideologues beholden to like weird MAGA people. So yeah, but I mean, I don't know, how did it all inform it? I'm not really sure. I mean, wow, that's a complicated question. I mean, once I moved, I moved away from home and I became, financially independent in college. And then I moved out to California when I was like 21. But when I moved to California, like I didn't know anybody. I didn't have any skills. I didn't have a college degree. So I was working shitty jobs for a very long time and living hand to mouth for a very, very long time. I did have the privilege of having parents that, like, while they didn't send me money, there was always the promise that they could, they would never let me have nowhere to live, for instance, and that is a definite privilege. And I'm definitely aware of that. Not that I ever took them up on it, but I was living in some pretty squalorous places that they were embarrassed to visit and scared to visit. And yeah, so I mean, I kind of have lived it all in a way. But yeah, I don't know. The library is a great place to work. It's not, it's a great place for building empathy as well.
Yeah.
I'll say that. And yeah. And comics kind of just, as far as a job is concerned, that just kind of fell. I don't want to say it fell into my lap. I definitely worked pretty hard to get where I got, but
did you pursue it though? Was there like an existential, I don't know about moment. I always say moment, but I can't, it's never like a like that. It's always, it seems a process, but like, what was that process like of you deciding, well, I like doing this. I enjoy doing this. I want to do it in public. I want other people to read these. I mean, it was very organic, I'll say. I mean, cause again, I started drawing comics when I was like 5 or 6, just kind of making things that I felt sort of had the same sort of vibe as Garfield or The Far Side or whatever. I was just trying to take my silly jokes and then make a drawing that went along with them. And those are my comics. And so I was just doing that for years and I wasn't technically very skilled at it, but I enjoyed it and I enjoyed telling the jokes. And so I just did that off and on throughout childhood and adolescence. And I was also playing music. I played clarinet and taught myself guitar and bass and blah, blah, blah. And just doing all kinds of things. And so I just have always been making things and just doing creative arts because I find it just fun and it is a good outlet for me and it keeps my hands busy. Mm-hmm. But then it was in my, I guess, mid-20s probably when I just started really kind of getting back into drawing again. And I was like, oh, it's just fun to draw silly little pictures. And I was doing a lot of drawing when I would go out to bars. Because when I was, still drinking a lot. So I'd sit at a bar in the afternoon and drink beer and draw.
just draw silly pictures. And I started sort of collecting them into these mini comics that I just make myself at the copy shop and staple together. And I would just like hand them out. I didn't even know they were called mini comics. I just was like, oh, I'm just making these little collections of drawings and jokes or whatever, and other people might like them. And that's when I sort of stumbled into other people that were doing it, because I was going to the local comic shop and like, hey, like, do you guys want to sell these for $1 at your, at the cash register? And they're like, well, maybe, but like, why don't you talk to these other people? Because they do the same thing. And so that's how I kind of like stumbled into a community of people who were also doing comics just for themselves for fun. And really just got tapped into this, what turned out to be a pretty huge community of people in the Bay Area that were just doing indie comics. And so I learned a lot from them, and I learned about just kind of different ways of doing things. I mean, at that time I knew people that were doing weekly comics in the alternative newspapers, and people that were like getting, book deals from little indie publishers and stuff like that. And I was like, wow, there's all these different options to do things. And that's when I started going to like comic shows. The indie comic shows were just were great back then. And it was a great way to network and meet people. And they still exist. There's like SPX and
Mocha.
Baltimore and Mocha and TCAF, I guess. So that's a little bigger one. But so I went to a bunch of those, and would go to 4 or 5 a year, and just started meeting people and just seeing more and more stuff that's out there. And so it was just over the course of these first handful of years, like realizing, oh, like this is something fun that I'm doing for myself, but I could figure out a way to do it maybe for money, for a little bit of money. So then I started experimenting with doing a weekly comic strip, and kind of cutting my teeth doing that, and started selling it to alternative news weeklies back when they existed. I guess they sort of exist anymore, but not in the same way. So I would just send out like a form letter to 200 newspapers across the country with some samples and be like, hey, do you want to like run this in your newspaper? And, I got into a handful of papers, and that was pretty fun. But it was going to shows and meeting people that really kind of led to the bigger opportunities that happened to be. I met somebody who at the time worked for Andrews McNeil Syndicate, and she got me in touch with somebody there and was like, hey, maybe we can figure out something, a way for you to fit into like what we're doing. And it didn't really work out. Like they were like, maybe you'd be good at, maybe you want to write some animation pitches. And I was like, that's amazing. I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know how to write any pitches at all. So I kind of stumbled around in that for a little while, and they're like, yeah, this isn't really working out. And nothing was really working out. And finally, the guy who I was working with, his name was John Glynn. He was like, well, let me just give you this guy's name over at Mad Magazine, and maybe they can do something with you. And that's how I ended up getting hooked up over there. And I did a strip for them for several years called The Machine That Travels Through Time.
Was that, now I voraciously read Mad Magazine when I was a kid. Was that a moment where you were like, oh my, like, was it an exciting moment for you? Or?
Oh yeah. It was like, that was like a dream come true. Like, I've had a handful of moments in my comics career that are like a dream come true. And, the first one was like seeing my comics in print in a newspaper, even if it was a weekly newspaper tucked in amongst like the sex ads and the drug ads and whatever. But yeah, Mad Magazine was huge for me because that was something I read also voraciously when I was a kid. And it was just like, as a kid growing up, it was the pinnacle of humor. Like there was nothing funnier than Mad Magazine.
I got to tell you, still, when I hear certain movie titles, all I think of is the Mad Magazine title for totally. That. Like if I hear Basic Instinct, my brain just goes basically It Stinks, which was the name of the parody from whatever, 1991, 1992, whenever it was out.
Yeah.
And I can't hear the actual title without thinking the Mad Magazine title.
Yeah, I totally get that. I mean, anytime I see anything, I imagine it folded over into like another image. So that was amazing. That was a dream come true. And that was great. And it was like the first time I was like getting like actual money to draw comics, like, more than just like whatever, $25 a week from doing these weeklies. And so that was incredible. And that also, so that also like paid for some of like my early transition related things, like just to bring it back to trans stuff. And I just thought that was super funny to me. Because like, I mean, they knew I was trans. I think, I mean, I'm sure it came up at some point. But it really, I don't know why. I found it so like, you guys are this like comic, this Mad magazine, which is again, amazing, great, but also like, had some like, wasn't super progressive in certain areas. And
hold on. Are you telling me Mad magazine wasn't on the cutting edge of like progressive, ethical kinds of thought?
Right. Yeah. So that always just made me laugh. So if you only knew. But then it all kind of paid off even more, more than a decade later, probably almost 15 years later, when John Glynn, who is still with Andrews and McNeil, reached out to me. This was long after I had stopped doing the Mad magazine strip. And I was just like, and he was like, hey, we're kind of rebooting Alley Oop. And I was like, I've heard of this comic strip. This is like from like a long, long time ago. Yeah. And he asked if I wanted to pitch to be the writer of it. And I was like, yeah, of course. So, I came up with by this point I had kind of figured out how to do a pitch. And so threw together all these writing samples and abstracts and outlines and all this stuff and sent it along. And that was my real career dream come true, is like getting in the dailies and doing a daily syndicated comic strip. Cause to me, that's how it all started. Like that's where I was first exposed to comics as a comedic art form, So when I got that job, it was just like, holy shit, I've made it like full circle.
Yes, I love that. That's a perfect place to end too. Full circle in the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. It was amazing. And I work with a brilliant artist, and I think we make a hilarious and beautiful comic strip that comes out every day. So,
oh man. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Thank you.
What a delight.
This has been super fun. It was a great chat. Thank you. You made it really fun.
And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, oh, 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 bye.